My name is Nora, and if you've ever trusted someone so deeply that you thought they'd never betray you, then you'll understand why my story still feels like a nightmare. But unlike most nightmares, I couldn't wake up from this one. From the outside, everyone thought my life was perfect. People used to call us the golden couple. My husband, Daniel, was the kind of man who charmed everyone he met. He had that easy smile, that warm handshake, the kind of presence that made people feel safe around him. At family gatherings, he was always the center of attention, the one people admired, the one my relatives told me I was lucky to have. And me, I was the woman behind the scenes, the one who kept everything running smoothly, the one who made sure the bills were paid, that the house stayed spotless, that Sophie, our daughter, was cared for and happy. I was the one making dinners, planning birthdays, supporting Daniel whenever he wanted to chase another one of his big dreams. That was my role, and I played it well because I truly believed we were building something together. We'd been married almost 10 years, a decade of birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, promises, a decade of late-night talks about the future, about Sophie's college, about the house we'd someday buy by the lake. To me, those years meant stability, commitment, love, and every time I looked at our daughter, I thought, this is our proof. She was Daniel's smile mixed with my stubborn streak, a little girl who loved to draw pictures of her family, always placing herself right in the middle of mommy and daddy. That's what I thought we were, a family. But looking back, I realize now how much I missed. The cracks had been there for a long time. I just didn't want to see them. The late nights he spent at the office, the sudden business trips, that didn't make sense. The way he started leaving his phone face down on the table, guarding it like it contained government secrets. When I'd ask questions, he'd brush me off with a laugh, or worse. He'd snap and tell me I was overthinking. And I believed him. Love makes you blind, doesn't it? You excuse things. You tell yourself he's stressed, or tired, or that things will get better when work slows down. You don't want to imagine that the man you share a bed with could be lying straight to your face. Then one morning, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Sophie had a math test that day, and she'd been so nervous at breakfast. I was pouring her orange juice, packing her lunch, humming to myself, when Daniel walked into the kitchen. His face looked different. Not angry, not sad, just empty, like all the color had been drained out of him. He didn't sit down, didn't greet Sophie, didn't kiss me like he usually did. Instead, he set a stack of papers on the kitchen table. I didn't understand at first. "What's this?" I asked, laughing nervously, because that's what I do when I don't know what's happening. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I want a divorce." The sound of that word, divorce, it felt like a bomb going off in my chest. My hands froze on the juice carton. I looked at Sophie, who was too busy munching her toast to realize what had just happened, and I whispered, "What?" Daniel slid the papers toward me, his expression unreadable. "I've fallen out of love, Nora. I don't want to do this anymore." Just like that. No fight, no explanation, no warning. The man I had spent 10 years of my life with was telling me I was disposable. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but my voice betrayed me. My throat was dry, my chest heavy, and all I could manage was a whisper. "After everything, you're just done?" He didn't answer. He just picked up his coffee mug, took a sip, and said, "It's better this way. For both of us." I signed the papers that night. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. But I told myself maybe this was fate. Maybe letting go was the only way forward. I cried myself to sleep for weeks, but eventually, I started telling myself I would survive this. I had to for Sophie. And then one night while packing boxes, I found out the truth. I was in our home office, going through the filing cabinet to pack away important documents. I wanted to make sure Sophie's birth certificate and school papers were safe. That's when I stumbled across a thin folder shoved in the very back, behind old tax returns. It looked ordinary, but when I opened it, my entire world tilted on its axis. Inside were copies of the very divorce papers Daniel had given me. Only they weren't filed. There was no court stamp, no signatures beyond mine. My breath caught in my throat as I flipped through the pages. It was all a performance. A trick. My heart raced. Why would he lie about something like this? And then, underneath those papers, I found something worse. Bank statements. credit card applications, business loans, all with my name listed as the responsible party. Debts I had never seen, accounts I had never opened. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, but the more I read, the clearer it became. Daniel hadn't just lied about the divorce. He had been systematically setting me up. Every loan, every debt, every risky investment was tied to me. If things went south, it would be my credit ruined, my reputation shredded, my life in ruins, while he walked away clean. I felt sick. My stomach twisted, so hard I thought I might throw up right there on the office floor. The room spun, and I clutched the desk to steady myself. My mind kept screaming, why? Why would he do this to me? I thought back to the past year. His sudden coldness. The distance. The way he'd started criticizing me over little things, making me feel small. It wasn't random. He'd been conditioning me, breaking me down so I wouldn't fight back when he finally pulled the rug out from under me. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I shoved the papers back into the folder, but then something inside me snapped. No, I wasn't going to let him do this. Not without answers. Not without a fight. That night, when Daniel came home, I tried to act normal. I made dinner, helped Sophie with her homework, tucked her into bed. But once the house was quiet, I walked into the living room where he was watching TV and threw the folder down on the coffee table. What is this? My voice was sharp, stronger than I felt. Daniel glanced at the folder, then at me, his expression calm. Too calm. He didn't even look surprised. You shouldn't be snooping through my things. Snooping. My voice cracked. This is fraud, Daniel. These are loans in my name, debts I never agreed to. And the divorce. You never even filed it. What the hell are you doing? For the first time, I saw it, the mask slipping. His eyes hardened, his mouth curved into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was cold, cruel. You're overreacting, he said smoothly. Those papers will get filed when the time is right. As for the debts, well, he leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed, as if we were discussing the weather. Someone has to take responsibility, Nora. You've had it too easy for too long. Consider it balance. Balance. The word echoed in my skull. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're trying to ruin me. Why? What did I ever do to deserve this? He chuckled, shaking his head. Always the victim. You still don't get it, do you? My reputation matters. My future matters. And frankly, you're holding me back. This way I get to move on clean, and you, well, you'll manage somehow. The casual cruelty in his tone shattered something inside me. This wasn't the man I had married. Or maybe it was, and I had just been too blind to see it. I wanted to scream, to tear the smug look off his face. But instead, I gathered the folder, pressed it to my chest, and walked away. I knew then that arguing wouldn't change anything. He had already made up his mind. To him, I wasn't a partner. I was a liability to be disposed of, a pawn in his carefully laid plan. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Phone calls he stepped outside to take, long hours at the office that made no sense. And then the perfume. It was faint at first, a trace of something floral clinging to his shirt when he came home late. I wanted to dismiss it, but deep down I knew. There was someone else. I needed proof. So one afternoon, when Sophie was at a friend's birthday party, I followed him. My heart hammered the entire time, terrified he'd spot me, terrified of what I might find. I parked a few blocks away from the restaurant he claimed to be having a meeting at and waited. And then I saw them. Daniel, walking hand in hand with a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger, dressed elegantly, her laughter carrying across the street as he leaned in close. They looked comfortable, intimate, like this wasn't their first time. My stomach churned as he placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside. I sat frozen in my car, tears blurring my vision, but I forced myself to lift my phone and snap pictures. Dozens of them. Every smile, every touch, every betrayal caught on camera. My hands shook as I scrolled through the photos, but beneath the heartbreak, something else began to burn. Anger. Pure, unrelenting anger. When he came home that night, I pretended nothing was wrong. I kissed him on the cheek, set his plate on the table, and listened as he lied about his meeting. Every word felt like poison, but I swallowed it down. Because now I had what I needed. Proof. Still, the weight of it all crushed me. Late at night, after Sophie was asleep, I'd lock myself in the bathroom and let the sobs rip through me. I'd stare at my reflection in the mirror, eyes red and swollen, whispering, "Why wasn't I enough?" But slowly, the grief began to shift. Grief turned into rage. Rage into resolve. I realized that crying wouldn't save me. Begging wouldn't stop him. The only way out was through. And if Daniel wanted to destroy me, he was going to learn I wasn't so easy to break. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd roll over, sign whatever he shoved in front of me, and disappear quietly. He was wrong. That night after he drifted off to sleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The rhythm of his breathing should have been familiar, comforting, but now it sounded like the steady hiss of a predator, calm only because it believed its prey had already been caught. I couldn't stop replaying the folder in my hands, the forged debts, the photos of him with her. It was like my mind was on fire, sparks of betrayal lighting up every memory we'd shared. I thought the tears would come, but they didn't. I was too hollow, too stunned. All I felt was the heavy weight of realization pressing down on me. He had been planning this for months, years maybe, and I had walked right into it, blind, trusting, naive. I rolled onto my side and looked at him in the dim glow of the moonlight. He looked so peaceful, so harmless, like a child lost in dreams. But I knew better now. That face, that mask, was just that, a mask. Behind it was someone cold, calculating, and ruthless enough to use the woman who had stood by his side for a decade as nothing more than a scapegoat. The next morning, I went through the motions as if nothing had changed. I packed Sophie's lunch, braided her hair, smiled when she hugged me goodbye. But inside, I was crumbling. Every time Daniel touched me, every time he smiled that charming smile, it made my stomach turn. Yet I said nothing. Because I knew if I confronted him now, without preparation, he would twist it all back on me. He'd call me paranoid, unstable, emotional. And he was good at lying, too good. So I stayed quiet. But the silence was eating me alive. Late at night, I'd lock myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink so hard my knuckles turned white, sobbing into the mirror until my face blurred. I'd whisper to myself over and over, "You can't break. You can't let him win." It was during one of those breakdowns that something shifted inside me. As I stared into the mirror, swollen eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, I realized I barely recognized myself anymore. I looked like a ghost. And suddenly I felt it, that spark of anger buried beneath the grief. A spark that whispered, "He thinks you're weak. He thinks you'll just disappear. But he has no idea who you really are." That was the first time I allowed myself to imagine revenge. At first, it was just fleeting thoughts, fantasies of exposing him, of watching his perfect image crumble. But the more I thought about it, the more it took root. The more it grew. Soon, it wasn't just a fantasy. It was a plan. The first step was evidence. If I wanted to survive this, I needed proof, not just of his affair, but of everything. Every shady account, every loan, every asset he'd hidden away. When he left for work, I searched his office again. I copied down account numbers, photographed documents, emailed them to a private account he didn't know existed. Each discovery was like a puzzle piece falling into place, revealing the scale of what he'd done. Offshore accounts, fake business expenses, shell companies, some even under my name. It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated sabotage. The disgust boiled inside me, but I didn't stop. One afternoon, I followed him again. Sophie was at a friend's house, and Daniel claimed he had another meeting. I parked a few blocks away, camera ready, watching him with her, the way he laughed, the way he leaned in close, the way his hand brushed hers. I felt rage burn through me hotter than ever. But I didn't look away. I clicked photo after photo, freezing each moment of betrayal into undeniable proof. At home, I started journaling everything. Dates, times, locations. Every lie he told, every inconsistency. My journal became my weapon, a record of his deceit. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was building a case. But revenge requires more than proof. It requires patience. It requires pretending. So I wore the mask. I cooked his dinners, folded his laundry, kissed him goodnight. And all the while, inside, I was sharpening my blade. Sometimes, I wondered if he could feel the change in me, The silence, the way I watched him a little too closely. But if he did, he never showed it. In public, we looked the same as always. The perfect couple. The golden pair. In private, I was a shadow, gathering strength in the dark. My heart was shattered, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Quietly, carefully, I reached out to a friend of a friend who worked with lawyers. I didn't tell them everything, not at first. I just asked questions about hidden assets, about debts, about how people hide money during divorce. That's when I learned about forensic accountants, people who could follow the trail no matter how well it was buried. The more I learned, the more empowered I felt. But the nights were still hard. Some evenings I'd crawl into bed with Sophie, wrapping my arms around her as she slept, breathing in her soft hair and praying she would never see her father the way I now did. She adored him, still saw him as the hero who told bedtime stories and cheered from the sidelines at her soccer games. How could I shatter that image for her? How could I protect her and still expose him? I wrestled with that question over and over, but the answer always came back the same. If I let him destroy me, eventually he would destroy her too. He was willing to use me as a shield for his sins. What made me think he wouldn't do the same to his own daughter if it served him? So I steeled myself. I hardened. I told myself my revenge wasn't just for me. It was for Sophie, for her future, for her safety. The more I planned, the stronger I became. The fear began to fade, replaced by something colder, sharper. One night, sitting alone in the dark living room while Daniel slept upstairs, I whispered into the silence, "You wanted me to disappear. Instead, I'm going to make sure the world sees exactly who you are." And from that moment on, there was no turning back. I started setting the pieces into motion the way a surgeon plans an operation, slowly, deliberately, with a calm that fooled everyone watching. Months of collecting scraps of proof had turned into a heavy file that could cut through Daniel's lies. Now I had to turn those scraps into a blade. I couldn't do this alone. I called Claire, the lawyer I'd found through a friend, a woman with a stare that made liars uncomfortable. I didn't tell her everything at once. I let her ask the questions and watched her weigh each answer. When I finally put the folder on her desk and opened it, she didn't flinch. "You were right to bring me this," she said quietly. "This goes deeper than an affair. You're looking at deliberate, systematic fraud." She recommended a forensic accountant, someone who could follow the money no matter how cleverly it had been hidden. That's how I met Marcus, a quiet man with tired eyes and a mind that loved messy ledgers. Marcus and Claire became my little war council. Marcus walked me through what he'd already sniffed out: shell companies with barely functional phone numbers, invoices paid to consultants that were obviously fake, transfers routed through third parties to mask the origin. He pointed to a series of transactions that traced back to one small trust account that Daniel controlled, an account that, on paper, didn't belong to him. But paper can be negotiated. People can be named, switched, forged. He explained how easy it was for someone to create the illusion of cleanliness if you knew how to lay down the tracks. Daniel knew. He'd laid tracks for years. We mapped a plan that covered legal, financial, and personal fronts. Legally, we'd move to freeze suspected accounts and compel disclosure. Financially, Marcus would keep digging until he found a single incontrovertible thread tying those accounts to Daniel. Personally, I wanted the exposure to be public enough that his social and professional life would crack, because his reputation had been a shield that allowed him to hurt people with impunity. And finally, a small, surgical humiliation that would hit him where he loved to live, his image as a father and a pillar of the community. We secured Sophie's safety first. Claire put in place a private guardianship contingency plan with a trusted family friend so that if Daniel tried any sudden custody gambits, Sophie would have a stable place to stay until the court could sort the mess. I wanted my daughter to sleep at night while the rest of our life trembled and shook. Then I began to bait him. I kept the mask on, smiles for neighbors, dinners plated carefully, polite conversations at school functions. I let him think I was broken. That was the cruelest part, pretending to be the woman he tried to erase. The difference between him and me was that he never suspected the silence held anything but surrender. The rage he had expected to find withered into a different, colder thing, strategy. I hired a private investigator, not the dramatic kind you see on television, but someone methodical and patient. The PI trailed Daniel for weeks, collecting receipts, noting patterns of travel, confirming the photographs I'd taken. When her report landed on Claire's desk, it read like a map of betrayal. Dinners in hotels, late-night hotel charges that matched the times he claimed overtime, gifts with receipts tied to the same corporate account we were watching. She also found evidence that the woman in the pictures had been receiving transfers into an account linked to a company that showed up on Marcus's ledger as a vendor. The conspiracy was woven tight, but not perfect. With mounting evidence, Claire moved to the courts. We filed motions to compel asset disclosure and asked for temporary relief to freeze suspicious accounts. Daniel's lawyer, predictably, tried to object, to claim invasion of privacy, to argue that the motions were an attempt to harass. The judge disagreed. The first order came down like cold iron, several accounts frozen pending investigation. I remember the moment I got the call. Daniel's voice on the other side was controlled at first, then fraying. He sounded small in a way I had never heard. Pride can be a royal thing. Watch it fall, and the man beneath is naked. The article ran next. I had reached out to a journalist who'd done solid reporting on white-collar crimes and asked if they'd consider a careful, evidence-backed piece. We timed it with the court filings. When the profile went live, it wasn't sensationalist, just the paper trail, the dates, the receipts, the people who'd been defrauded. The story made the rounds fast. Daniel's company issued a tepid denial at first, then silence. Board members called emergency meetings. Sponsors wrote terse emails. The board seat he loved was suddenly an anomaly in their glossy brochure. Seeing him publicly unravel was almost a relief. The man who'd sat with his hand on my knee at dinners, who'd introduced me as his wife at events, had a new asterisk next to his name now. I didn't dance in the streets. I kept to myself, but I did let myself feel the truth of it. He could no longer pretend. We didn't stop there. Claire and Marcus had more to uncover and more to press. Marcus traced the money to a circular set of companies. A chunk went into a charity Daniel touted at galas. Another portion paid for renovations at a property that a nominee owned. Each discovery became a new nail in the coffin. The judge allowed depositions. The forensic accounting was painful for Daniel. Every line item he thought untraceable was being described in painstaking detail. At one deposition, I sat behind a glass while his name dripped from his lips. No longer a charming facade, just an accused man trying to explain away checks and signatures. While law and accounting did their cold work, I planned 2 personal strikes engineered to be impossible to ignore, one aimed at his philanthropic image, and the other aimed at his role as a father. People trusted Daniel because he smiled on cue and wrote checks. He'd sat on the board of the Children's Arts Foundation for years, appearing in glossy photos next to donors with glasses raised. He loved that stage. I collected statements from small vendors who'd never been paid, contractors who had completed work on community projects but were never reimbursed, and a few former employees who'd been let go under suspicious circumstances. With Claire's help, we presented the board with an ugly, undeniable truth. Funds that looked charitable had been siphoned to shell vendors. The foundation removed him within a week. The gala that expected his speech sent an apology instead. He stood in a corridor outside the hall that used to welcome him and watched people step around him like he might spill something dirty. The second strike was more intimate and sharp. I wanted him to feel the exposure where he thought it couldn't reach, in Sophie's world. I arranged a small incidental reveal at a parent-teacher gathering. I worked with a sympathetic teacher and Claire to arrange for an accidental handoff, a folder containing internal emails and a memo I'd obtained, evidence that detailed his contempt for our marriage, his frank talk about clean exits and nominee liabilities. I read passages aloud, choosing my words slowly, letting each phrase land in the quiet of that schoolroom. Parents stiffened. A few whispered. Sophie, innocently coloring at a nearby table, looked up and felt the tension without comprehension. Daniel left the room before I finished reading. He didn't scream. He didn't plead. He simply walked out, hands clenched, like a man whose public script had been torn in half. Watching him go, the clean, practiced charm disappeared, replaced by something raw and human, the shock of a man realizing his illusions were public property now. No one applauded me afterward. It wasn't triumph in the way movies make it look. It was a cold exposure that sent ripples through his social life. He retaliated as men like him often do, with threats, with motion filings, with attempts to smear me. He filed an emergency custody request the next week, trying to paint me as unstable and vindictive. I had expected it, and Claire had expected it too. We were prepared. Marcus's reports, the PI's notes, the photographs, they all countered every allegation he leveled at me. When the judge denied his request for emergency custody, relief washed through me like a cool current. Sophie remained safely in my care. Daniel's face in that courtroom, pale, desperate, caught, was a kind of quiet victory. But legal wins are sterile. They don't fully satisfy the hurt. I wanted something that would haunt him. Not physical harm, never that, but a pattern of consequences that would force him to reckon. So I pushed on multiple fronts simultaneously. I exposed his financial manipulations to his professional network, letting the evidence speak for itself. Colleagues who'd once ignored whispers now asked hard questions. Sponsors backed away. The board members who shared drinks with him at galas no longer picked up his calls. He scrambled, trying PR damage control that looked absurd because the truth was so plainly documented. He offered mea culpas in emails that read like crafted fiction. They did not convince. Reputation, once repainted, peels back easily when your ledger shows the real color. The other front was quieter and surgical. I started making discreet calls to people he'd exploited, small contractors, former clients, encouraging them to file complaints and providing them the documentation to do so. The outrage built like pressure in a pipe until it burst. Small claims, civil suits, angry letters that landed on his desk. Each claim was small alone, but together they formed an architecture of proof that no PR campaign could shelter. Then came the settlement negotiation, a staged, tense theater where he believed he could buy silence. He offered a pittance and a confidentiality clause that would let him walk away with his illusions intact. Claire refused. She had drafted a settlement that required public disclosure of certain findings and restitution to those he'd wronged. It also imposed a forensic monitor on his accounts for years. He signed only after Marcus documented transfers showing the extent of the deceit. The courtroom became the place where a man who thought himself above consequence had to sign away part of the freedom he had promised himself. But the most wrenching moment came not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in the small, private ways his life would now be altered. He tried to repair his image through op-eds and excuses, but editors declined. He reached out to mutual friends who had refrained from judging him. Many turned away. He showed up at Sophie's soccer games trying to be the father he'd once been in public, but people looked at him differently now. There was pity, suspicion, a quiet distance. He had built a life of performance. The truth made his performances thin and obvious. Even then, he made one last desperate move, filing for divorce again in another county, trying to use technicalities and procedural errors to shift jurisdiction. Claire and Marcus were ready. We fought it at every stage, and the judge, now familiar with the web of evidence, dismissed his maneuver. The legal system, slow and often unfair, had tilted for once in a way that felt righteous. Throughout this, I kept myself surprising. People who'd expected me to crumble saw, instead, a woman who had learned to stand on a very different ground. I was not the wreck he had predicted. I ate pancakes with Sophie on Saturday mornings, walked her to school, and completed the boring paperwork of life that heals in small increments. Revenge had given me purpose, but living gave me meaning. The two coexisted in an odd, jagged harmony. There were moments of real humanity in the chaos. A vendor I'd stood up to in court came to me after a hearing and hugged me. "You did what I couldn't," he said, voice shaking. Women wrote to me, privately, saying they recognized his tactics in their own marriages. Those messages mattered more than headlines. They reminded me why I'd taken this road. To make sure no one else would be an easy mark because a charming man decided his life was more important than another person's. One night, after a particularly brutal deposition where Daniel tried to twist words into weapons, I sat alone in my car outside his building and let myself feel the exhaustion. I had wanted him to suffer, yes, but what I wanted most was the simple reclamation of my life. I wanted to be safe. I wanted Sophie to be secure. Watching him now reduced to frantic emails and empty apologies in private felt like the beginning of a closure I'd been denied for years. YouTube, in its rawness, needs these moments to breathe. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe. It helps small voices carry on. The truth doesn't need echo chambers. It needs witnesses. The final twist came quietly. After the settlement, a few of Daniel's business partners were indicted in a separate investigation, standing, perhaps, on the same shaky pillar of deceptions that had propped up his empire. We didn't pursue criminal charges. Claire advised restraint, recommending civil restitution and public exposure instead. But seeing the dominoes fall in other corridors of his life felt like validation. The system, imperfect as it is, had found a way to untangle some of the web he'd spun. When the dust settled, Daniel had health, freedom, and the hollowed remains of an image. He could rebuild, and because I am not cruel, I hoped he would find real contrition. But he would never again glide through a room and have people assume the best. The narrative had been rewritten, and that rewrite was irrevocable. Even after everything, revenge left me changed. It taught me the taste of my own strength and the cost that strength exacts. Some nights I woke from a dream where he was still orchestrating things from behind a polished smile. Some mornings I'd glance at my phone hoping for a message from someone who'd say it had all been a misunderstanding. It never came, and slowly I learned to let the quiet be my home. I let the small, ordinary joys stitch me back together. Pancake mornings, school plays, the tiny hand that still sought mine in the dark. One last, soft moment. Months after the headlines, a woman emailed me, saying my story gave her courage to leave her own manipulative partner. Her message was simple. Thank you. I left yesterday. I read it and felt the whole weight of what I'd done lift in some tiny way. This was the thing I wanted most, not to break a man, but to make sure other people could find their way out before the trap closed. If you followed this all the way, thank you. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share if you think someone needs to hear it. Stories like this aren't just entertainment. Sometimes they're blueprints for survival. And one more thing. I keep a folder in a locked drawer with every document, every scanned receipt, every photo. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Reminders that I survived. That the person who tried to erase me misjudged who I was. That truth, even when buried under years of charm and ledger entries, has a way of finding light. There's one final image I can't erase. Daniel walking away from a courtroom had bowed, a small paper bag in his hand filled with things he thought would matter. It's not triumph to watch another's ruin, but it is closure to know that the man who used me as a scapegoat can no longer hide behind his gilded mask. The rest of my life is for me and for Sophie. The past is a lesson, not a sentence. And if you like the story, please remember to like and subscribe. There are more I need to tell, and your support keeps this channel alive.